Good morning. Thank you for joining us on the Monday edition of TVC Breakfast. I'm Veronica Dan Ikboy. I'm not here alone. I have Mike Okwache joining me this morning. Mike,
Well, it's
good
great.
to have you back.
Well, it's great to be back. I'm telling you, it's really a wonderful Monday morning.
Absolutely.
Really nice to be here.
Right. Let's quickly head straight to what we need to talk about because there are several issues we will be having a conversation on this morning, and we will begin with this matter on the humanitarian aid that was given in Kano State. Now, between 2022 and 2023, more than 2.5 million Nigerians have been affected by flood. Just in 2022 alone, over 600 persons lost their lives, while about 1.3 million people were displaced. In Kano State, for instance, the National Emergency Management Agency has begun distribution of relief materials to households affected by flood disasters and to the vulnerable. TVC News Kano correspondent Ibrahim Isa has details.
Kano has been flagged as one of the flood-prone states in Nigeria. The flood has for many years destroyed houses and farmlands, rendering many residents homeless. The federal government, through National Emergency Management Agency NEMA, has since begun distribution of relief materials to 22,658 households affected by the 2022 flood disaster and to vulnerable groups in Kano State. NEMA's Director General, Mustapha Habib, witnessed the distribution in Kano in company of the State Deputy Governor, Amina Abdul Salam.
Approve this intervention specifically for people affected by the 2022 flood disaster and those classified as the most vulnerable person across the country. You may recall the sad incident of 2022 flood disaster, which devastated many communities across the country, including here in Kano. I had the cause to personally visit some of these communities in Wudil and Warawa local government areas, where a number of people were displaced and their farmlands and crops completely inundated.
Thank the federal government for approving this intervention to the states, and we wish and pray that more of such interventions will come our way in Kano State.
The food items distributed included rice, beans, sorghum, vegetable oil, salt, tomato paste, and seasoning cubes. Non-essential items were also handed out, including mosquito nets, nylon mats, blankets, mattresses, plastic buckets, sets of cooking pots, toiletries, and a cooking stove, among others. NEMA advised the beneficiaries to make proper use of the items to improve their socio-economic conditions and avoid selling them. Ibrahim Isa, TVC News, Kano.
Now, this distribution of relief materials is coming at about after a year that the rains, the floodings happened in Kano, and not just Kano, across the country there was floods, but then we're seeing the NEMA in Kano State just distributing relief materials to this person. Now the question is, why is it just coming now after a year? Yes, they are thanking the federal government for approving. I'm wondering why it took so long to approve these relief materials to this persons. And also the fact that relief materials are just relief materials. It is not addressing the root cause of what is causing flooding in the state. And I think that that is what the state government has to begin to look into.
Well, the issue there is, we all ask that question, why is this coming now? But if you look deeper, you'll understand that there are funding gaps which NEMA has always faced. And that funding gap doesn't give them the capacity to attend to everyone the way they would have liked to attend to everybody. So they have to wait for budgets to be made, for monies to be allocated, for them to be able to acquire all they need to acquire. Now, if you see what they've distributed in Kano, you will see that it's not just food items. There are grinding machines, there are sewing machines, there are pesticides, and there are, all of those grains and so on given to them so that people can even go back to their farms and go back to their businesses, to continue what they were doing, to fend for themselves. So the question now is, NEMA, when it comes to natural disaster can happen anytime. It doesn't announce, sometimes you don't see it coming. Like the issues of flood. Of course, there is always a warning ahead of time. There could be landslide, there could be low-cost attack, there could be anything. But an agency like NEMA should be funded and should have a standby. In fact, it should be like a standby agency where there are funds available, there are logistics available, there are all sorts of training, continuous training available for them to be able to attend to people when these things happen. That is what is expected. But NEMA, well, they try their best, but they have not received the kind of funding and the kind of attention they are meant to receive from the federal government. So sometimes they get counterpart assistance, from individuals, from organizations. We've seen mosques and churches sometimes, and even NGOs making contributions and distributions here and there, to augment what NEMA is given. So this is a wake-up call, because when someone has gone through devastation for over a year and traumatized, lost so much, and then after a year you're bringing relief materials, of course, well, we thank God something still came, but at the point where the person is most vulnerable, the person is most dejected, disadvantaged, vulnerable, that's the point that you should meet the person, so that the person,
that's the essence of even having
impact.
the emergency management agency in the first place.
After 1 year,
yes,
people would have tried to find their foot by themselves. Whatever has happened after 1 year, some people would have moved on, trying to patch up their lives here and there. So you bring in relief materials at that time. All right, it's good you bring in something, but at the time of need is when these things are most valuable.
This is why some persons do not have confidence in the government, because when they need something, it is not coming at the time of need to address those things critically as they want it. Yes, we appreciate the fact that something is coming at least, but then if they return to their farms, return to their businesses, we have been getting warnings with regards to flooding, also going to happen this year again. What happens to the seedlings, the farms that they return to, it will be swept away again. That is why I'm saying...
And it's back to square one.
So it's back to square one. This is not addressing the root cause of why they were disadvantaged. So I believe government should begin to look into the matter of climate change, how we can ensure that persons are not as adversely affected like we see. I mean, about over 22,000 persons were said to have been reached with regards to this matter. That's quite a huge number, if you ask me. And I believe that that number might have increased after a year and would increase if there is another flooding as it is.
And in fact, about over 660 households have been, identified to benefit from this nationwide. We saw earlier in the month, I think on the 4th of August, we saw how, several other tens of thousands of victims or vulnerable people got materials from NEMA in Abia State.
Yes.
And that came from about 4 or 5 local governments, and so on. So they've been distributing this across the nation, and about over 660,000 people or households have been identified across the 36 states and the FCT. So imagine how much it's going to cost to attend to over 600,000 households with this same kind of or similar kind of materials, to ensure that people go back to their normal lives, people go back to their various businesses and keep life going. So NEMA would certainly not have that kind of fund. So they have to wait for, periodic and marginal allocation of funds here and there, to be given either by federal government or to be given by international partners or to be donated or contributed by NGOs and so on. So it tells you that there is no guarantee in that regard. So we have to be more intentional. Government has to be, because NEMA is an establishment of the law. So the point there is, if NEMA is an establishment of the law, then everything NEMA needs to function at the right time when people need it should be provided for them. So if you say, okay, recall that in Adamawa State, the warehouse of NEMA, was attacked, and people got a lot of things sometime ago. So the issue there is that when these things are provided, if you feel that, if we don't give it to them, or if we don't, there's a likelihood of corruption, as the case may be, you set up parameters and templates to monitor the system so that whatever is given to them is accounted for. I believe these things are possible. But NEMA has to be funded adequately because it's a standby agency to act at whatever time that people need
As
it.
needed.
So that is very important. Waiting until one year after, sometimes it doesn't meet the need.
It doesn't.
And we have to put it straight there. Sometimes it doesn't meet the need because at the time when people need it is when they can value.
Recall that we have been talking about the matter of food security in this country, and some of these persons are the farmers.
Of course.
Who supply the nation with food items. That is why I am specifically hammering on the matter of dealing with issues at the root. Because if we keep saying we are going through the means of palliatives, cushioning the effect, and you are not addressing the root, then we are not really addressing anything. At the end of the day, we are spending even much more as against when we would have, tackled it head on from the root to ensure that these farmers are provided for and they can farm and then store their food items at times of flooding, move them up to the hilly, the plains and all of that so that they can farm. We recall African farmer Mogaji speaking to us about, seedlings for times of flooding and all of it, how you can farm and yet the flooding will not affect your farmlands and your produce at the end of the day. These are the issues we should be looking at.
I think various ministries of government have to, because for NEMA is an emergency agency.
Yes, agreed. Yeah. It is not its responsibility.
Exactly. So government, on the other hand, there has to be a collaboration between federal and state in this regard. Because when federal government, from the perspective of the capacity, to move, because a lot of the states don't have the capacities to do some of the things they're talking about, because some of them are still struggling with payment of salaries. Some are owing pensioners and, have not been able to pay all of those salaries for months, into several months.
Whichever way, they have to complement
So
the federal government.
Federal government and state government will have to come together in this regard. The ministries of environment, ministry of agriculture, ministries of land at the level of the state should all come together to see even water resources as a way of trying to see how they can mitigate these issues by going into what is the cost of this thing. Some of the rivers have not been dredged for so many years, some even decades. They are now shallow. They have to be dredged. If they dredge them so that water can, flow through the rivers instead of, going through the villages. So these are all part of the things, but they require heavy capital to do that. So the priorities would be, okay, if government or federal government on one hand is needing finances to build roads and build houses and build all of those bridges and various kind of infrastructure.
But we also consider the damages done to this infrastructure by flooding.
Of course. So the issue there is that there has to be a kind of a balancing. Because we just had the issue of about over 25 billion, whatever, sank into the Port Harcourt refinery for it to come upstream. Of course, when people talk about the issue of the impact of price of oil, on all issues, then you begin to say, that's the priority. When they talk about flooding, that's a priority. When they talk about the issue of security, that's a priority. So, but all of this are still the same thing. The same one government is the one to be responsible for all of those. So the point there is that we are going to need more intentional tactic and strategy and also collaboration to be able to attend to some of these things. Because if it is the cost of price of fuel on all aspects, even including issues of rent, including issues of food and so on, that one is there. It has to be attended to. Security has to be attended to. Flooding has to be attended to.
We agree. But flooding at the core is flooding. It has to be attended to.